some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
This hour, because there's been a development in the search for Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie.
There are some puzzling new developments tonight in the ongoing search for Nancy Guthrie.
I have long believed that we miss out on fully celebrating resurrection if we do not acknowledge the feelings of loss, pain, and yes, death. It is the darkness that makes music, this morning's light, so magnificent, so blindingly beautiful. It is all the brighter because it is so, music, desperately needed. What I'm looking at is, music, the control, what we would call a control zone between the bed and the wall. Because if the suspect comes in there and this is a pattern of life to sleep on the left side of that bed, notice there's an alarm clock there. Notice her books are there. Notice her chair is there. All these items tell us that that's the side that, music, she would be. When we go through our daily life, we don't think about where we put our hands. We don't think about where we step. Music, same thing applies, say for instance, to a perpetrator at a crime scene. You just go through these motions. You don't think about, well, what happens if I leave something here and the cops find it later? Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show. She sat in her chair. She said it was good to be home. And then, in a separate video posted through her church, she spoke about something else entirely. Loss, pain, death, and the darkness that makes the light so desperately needed. The words of a daughter who is holding together a public life while privately processing the disappearance of her mother. Meanwhile, the investigation has turned its focus back to two spaces inside Nancy Guthrie's home that may hold evidence that has not yet been fully extracted, the bedroom and the garage. And the reasons for that renewed interest reveal something about both the crime itself and the way it was initially processed.
What I'm looking at is the control, what we would call a control zone between the bed and the wall. Because if the suspect comes in there and this is her pattern of life to sleep on the left side of that bed, notice there's an alarm clock there. Notice her books are there. Notice her chair is there. All these items tell us that that's the side that she would be. So now picture the suspect on the left side of that bed. That also gives us an indication of potentially a point of entry. Into the house. Now, and that goes into this idea of the tarps. Where did this tarp idea come from? Music, and how is the suspect going to control her and quote, put her in a tarp? I think that's out of play here, and it goes back to the blood evidence on the front porch where he's taking her through the front door. Pattern of life. That is the term a retired homicide detective uses to describe what the bedroom tells investigators about the moments before Nancy was taken. She slept on the left side of the bed. Her alarm clock was there. Her books were there. Her chair was positioned nearby. The kind of chair an elderly person uses to ease into the morning. To move their legs. To transition from sleep to wakefulness. All of those items on the left side. And that means the suspect confronted her on that side in the narrow space between the bed and the wall where she was effectively trapped the moment he appeared. The control zone. A space where the suspect has the advantage of position. Where the victim cannot easily flee. Where the geometry of furniture creates a funnel. Nancy would have seen him from that confined space. Possibly illuminated only by whatever light source was within reach. An 84-year-old woman unable to hear without her aids, unable to walk more than short distances, looking at a masked figure with a weapon visible at his waistline. MacDonald dismisses the theory that a tarp was in the suspect's backpack. If the suspect intended to wrap Nancy in a tarp inside the house, the bedroom is where that would have happened. But, the blood evidence is not in the bedroom. It is at the front door and on the porch. That tells a story of Nancy walking through the house under the control of the weapon, complying until she reached the front door, and then fighting when she realized she was being taken outside. The bedroom itself, the surfaces the suspect touched, the floor he walked on, the doorknob he gripped, the wall he may have brushed against in the narrow space, all represent potential sources of DNA and fingerprint evidence. Touch DNA from skin cells that slew off wrists and hands, static prints on smooth surfaces, music, hair that falls during physical exertion. A forensics professor described these as incredibly fragile evidence types that require immediate scene security to preserve. And the question of whether that bedroom was processed with the thoroughness it required during the initial response remains unanswered. When we go through our daily life, we don't think about where we put our hands, we don't think about where we step. The same thing applies, say for instance, to a perpetrator at a crime scene. You just go through these motions, you don't think about, well, what happens if I leave something here and the cops find it later? All right? Because you're focused on trying to get control over a subject, for instance, in a kidnapping. So, yeah, that whole area in there has potential for contamination. They're not thinking where they're stepping, they're not thinking where they're touching. And it's not just, say for instance, fingerprints are leaving behind, it can be touch DNA, and touch DNA also we can have deposition of say sloughing skin cells that fall off of the wrist. Say the areas that aren't gloved, maybe they've left a hair behind. The suspect was focused on controlling Nancy, not on forensic countermeasures, not on where his hands were touching, not on what was falling from his body as he moved through a space that required physical effort, gripping, pulling, guiding, lifting. And in those unconscious moments, the kind of evidence that solves cases is deposited. Skin cells from an unloved wrist, a hair dislodged during movement, a fingerprint left on a surface that was not part of the conscious plan. These are the traces that a crime scene preserved in its original state could yield. And these are the traces that become progressively harder to recover with each hour that passes after the scene is released. The garage raises a different set of questions. Nancy entered her home through the garage routinely. It was her pattern of life. The garage door opened and closed within a 2-minute window when she arrived home that evening. Her car, a blue Subaru, was pulled out days later and examined. But the garage itself, the floor, the walls, the interior door, the control panel, may not have been processed with the same urgency. Garage door openers operate on low-frequency radio waves, typically in the 300 to 400 MHz range. The signal between the remote and the motor unit carries a coded instruction to open or close. And as demonstrated in a publicly available video, those signals can be intercepted and replicated with surprisingly basic technology. In one case, a music, repurposed children's toy with a microcontroller that transmits across a wide range of frequencies. The possibility that the garage door was hacked as a point of entry has not been publicly addressed by investigators. And if the garage door was opened by an unauthorized signal, whether the event would have been logged in the same way as a legitimate remote activation is an open technical question. An Amazon package appeared on Nancy's porch between the time the suspect was captured on the doorbell camera and the following morning. Before the suspect's visit, no package. After, a package clearly visible in the frame. Whether the package was placed there by the suspect as a cover, a reason to be walking through the neighborhood if questioned, or whether it was a legitimate delivery that arrived separately is under investigation. Amazon delivery vehicles, including older models, have cameras. The newer trucks have 360 degrees coverage. Whatever those cameras captured in the neighborhood in the period leading up to the abduction represents another data source that investigators should be extracting. And if you want to follow how the bedroom evidence, the garage analysis, and the Amazon delivery data converge, make sure you're subscribed because in this case every update has changed what we thought we knew. We figured out that Nancy Guthrie regularly went through her garage getting into her house. But only thing that's been taken out to be examined has been her vehicle, which investigators had for a couple of weeks, but there was 6 days. Nancy, from the time she went missing until the time investigators even took her car out of the garage. So, there's plenty of opportunities to find something in there. Was that a staging area by the potential kidnappers? Was the garage a staging area? The question hangs in the space between what investigators know and what the public has been told. If the suspect entered through the garage, either by hacking the opener or by finding the interior door unlocked, which neighbors have suggested was Nancy's habit, the garage would contain evidence of that entry. Footprints on the concrete floor, touch DNA on the interior door handle, tool marks on the lock if picking was involved. And if the suspect spent time in the garage before entering the house, waiting for Nancy to fall asleep, the duration of that wait increases the likelihood of recoverable biological material. The blood evidence outside the home has been analyzed extensively. The pattern on the porch, large gravitational drops, medium velocity droplets from coughing, hollow ring patterns from air bubbles and aspirated blood, tells a specific story about what happened at the front door. But a forensics professor also noted that the blood contains indicators of anticoagulant medication. Nancy was on blood thinners, which caused the kind of subcutaneous bruising visible in photographs of her arms. Anticoagulant blood behaves differently from normal blood. It flows more freely, produces larger patterns, and does not clot as quickly. For a woman on blood thinners, even a moderate blow to the face would produce significant bleeding. And the pattern on the porch is consistent with exactly that scenario. The interior of the home, viewed through video shared by Savannah on visits, shows a foyer that is immaculate. No furniture overturned, no fixtures displaced. A small table with a lamp positioned precariously, untouched. No interior rug at the entrance, which means no fabric surface to capture blood or footprints that may have been tracked from the porch through the door. The black exterior doormat, which would have absorbed blood invisibly due to its color, was not collected during the initial processing. The lead investigator assigned to the case had never handled a homicide. The most experienced detective involved had 2 years on the job. And while the FBI is now fully integrated, the decisions made in those critical first hours, what to collect, what to photograph, when to release the scene, were made by individuals whose experience did not match the complexity of what they were facing. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. A mother. Her bedroom tells the story of where she was controlled. Her garage may tell the story of how the suspect entered. Her porch tells the story of where she fought back. And her daughter, who returned to television and spoke about darkness and light, is carrying the weight of all 3 stories, while the world watches and waits for the one piece of evidence that turns a missing person case into a solved one. If you have any information, contact the FBI at 1-800, call FBI or submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. The reward currently exceeds $1.2 million. A conviction or even an arrest is not required. This story is far from over. Subscribe now, because in this case, every update has changed what we thought we knew. This content is analytical music, based on publicly available sources for informational and awareness purposes only. It does not represent official conclusions. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Viewers should consult additional independent sources for a complete perspective.